Elysia Dayne, Book 1, Under an Azure Sky. Written by Wil Chan. Narrated by Rhonda Pownall. Prologue. The Time Before. There was a time when I thought that dragons were beautiful. Even now, I wish my infatuation could have lasted. Sadly, my age of innocence dissipated into the ether long ago. I was born into a heroic age of fabled kings, knights, and mythical beasts. In my second life, I will live by the sword, with my own stories weaved from the same fabric, regaled in words and in song by overzealous bards. These narrators will know my tales better than I know the truth. The unspoken reality is that my fiery path was lit by an accident of fate. In my first life, none of this had any meaning. As a child, like everyone else, I listened to these fantastical stories around the communal campfire. Tinged with whimsy, their exceptional circumstances were unrelated to my own. Except for the quaint presence of a dragon, my life was neatly tucked away from that existence. Fate will teach me differently, but before she waved her unwelcome hand, my life was ordinary. When I was born, my path had already been set out for me. A child born into royalty will become a royal, and a child born into a farming community will become a farmer. If I study my lineage to generations past, I can safely assume that every one of my ancestors were farmers. I was a farmer's child. That was my fate. A fish born into a lake will see the world as a lake. A fish born into a pond will see the world as a pond. And a fish born into a puddle will see the world as a puddle. I loved my puddle. It was my perfect circle of happiness, and at its centre was my family. Dad was a kind and gentle soul. He always had the ability to make me feel 10 feet tall. And Mum was always there to comfort me when I fell some way short. I only had one real complaint. I was a child without a birthday. 2 words: summer solstice. Of all the days of the year, my birthday fell on Midsummer's Day. Over the years, many have tried to console me, telling me how it is a special day of celebration. Even the word console is derived from consolation, which means I could only ever be second best, and pitted against the celebration of the solstice. Second best is nothing. Instead, it was completely overshadowing. My birthday was a lonely mushroom left in the dark, while Midsummer's Day blazed in glorious sunshine. I hated the solstice, and by extension, I hated my own birthday. But that wasn't my first memory. I fondly recollect it as being a wildly happy one from when I was 3 or 4. It's uncanny that first memories are always spectacularly awesome or equally as upsetting, and never somewhere in between. I recall sitting on Dad's broad, strong shoulders, journeying from point to point, place to place. It was my favourite mode of transport. We went everywhere this way, sharing smiles and laughter. He had twin whorls on the top of his head, which were considered unusual, and I found it fascinating, pressing them like buttons. We lived on a plateau high up in the mountains, and on his shoulders I felt like I was on the top of the world. This was the first time he introduced the entire village. 100 detached wooden houses were knitted together loosely. We greeted each and every neighbour that we passed along the way. There were many I didn't recognise yet, but I would come to know them all. Past the houses were vast fields of blue corn that stretched into the distance. I thought that even with 100 families, it would be a gargantuan task to harvest. I always imagined that our village was a reflection of the entire world, with each and every other community being just as idyllic, just as beautiful. Dad assured me that it was a falsehood, and this picture of Elysian beauty was ours alone. The first time he showed me the vista beyond the bounds of our village, I was astounded by the natural artistry that surrounded my being. The Sky Lords were in a playful mood when they created this masterpiece. To the west, a lush pine forest beyond the cornfields. To the north, a resplendent waterfall dropped from the mountainside. Most amazing of all, to the south, the land far below was covered by swathes of lavender and bluegrass fields that almost touched the horizon. The soft breeze would make the fields quiver like lapping waves on a calm sea. From afar, my home had the look of an island stranded in the vastness of an unending ocean. Dad told me that out of all of the kingdoms, only our Azurean fields are blue, and the Sky Lords must have looked upon our motherland favourably when they created the realms of man. That day, on our way back home, I couldn't help but notice the looming silhouette of an immense building, like a sentinel protecting us from harm. It was immediately familiar to me. It dwarfed every house in the village, larger even than the silos and the mills. My dad was a farmer, but his skill was carpentry. Before I was born, he designed and built this colossal barn to keep the livestock under cover and hidden. It looked so grand and sturdy, I believed it would stand for 100 years. With equal shares of pride and humour, Pa Neeland, the village elder who oversaw the welfare of the animals, named it the Animal Palace, with capital letters. He enjoyed receiving praise, and I was kind enough to give it. Most days he would let me pet and feed the goats. He liked to spin a yarn or two, so he was the one who apprised me of the fact that the Animal Palace was built to hide the animals from the sight of a dragon. My ears immediately pricked up, and many questions were asked. He elaborated that a few years before I was born, a dragon moved to a nearby valley to our east. He told me it could be viewed from a vantage point called the Devil's Tongue. It sounded like it came from the fevered imagination of a bard, designed to be ominous, foreboding, and above all, fictional. But he described it in detail. Of course, the information was of no use to me, as young children were forbidden from setting foot on the eastern path. So I obviously had no perception of the precipice with a 1,000-foot drop at the edge of the plateau. It also meant I had no clue about the unnatural ledge that protruded over the void. It was named many generations ago. I made a mental note. Good, pleasant locations are afforded nice names like Animal Palace, and sinister, dangerous ones are called things like the Devil's Tongue. The conversation was moving away from my area of interest, though. I wanted to know more about the dragon. My attention had been piqued, but frustratingly, everyone I talked to was evasive and oblique. Throughout my young life, I overheard grown-ups chatting casually about the dragon as if it were a common animal like a goat or a donkey. Sometimes I heard strange roars from the distance, and everyone would stand like cottontails watching for a hawk. Still, I was excluded from the existence of dragons. How old is old enough? I was able to charm the birds out of the trees where Dad was concerned, but he always stood firm when it came to the dragon. I pestered him constantly when he was at work. He was always building and fixing things, and I was his willing assistant. He always told me not to be complacent and used the example of how young Thurgood trapped his hand in the water wheel, with the end result being amputation. Every time I passed Thurgood, who was by now a young man, I gawped at his stump. He noticed me every time without fail. To cover my trespass, I would flash him an honest and warm smile, hoping to be forgiven. He always smiled back, tipping his straw hat to me. I pestered Dad at home too, just outside of Mum's earshot. She had no patience for my antics. That remained the pattern for several years, until the eve of my 8th birthday. I remember it as clear as day. Dad announced around the dinner table that my wish would be granted. I rejoiced before Mum reminded him of their obligation to attend the regional solstice festival. I cursed the summer solstice over and over again in my mind when she suggested we go after the festival. This was the same festival that had stolen happiness from every single one of my birthdays. I shook my head in dismay and counted that we could go before they left. I pleaded with wide-eyed hopefulness, full of slow nods and a beaming, toothy smile, ensuring that I displayed my huge, cavernous dimples. Mum didn't argue. This time. "We can do this tomorrow, Dad." He nodded. "We can." Mum shook her head in slight disbelief, but recovered with a wry smile. She picked her battles carefully. She always knew that Dad was wrapped around my little finger. As far as I was concerned, tomorrow couldn't come quickly enough. I could barely sleep with the weight of anticipation. When the rooster sounded, my excitement eclipsed my tiredness. First, I had to endure the last day of school before the solstice break. Mum took me to the schoolhouse before she slipped into her guise as the teacher. The sands of time slowed to a crawl as she taught arithmetic, ethics, and literature, none of which was dragon-related, and so it meshed into a ball of boredom. When she was reciting the teachings of the Sky Lords, she caught me talking and laughing with my best friend, Solis. There was one word that Mum feared: nepotism. Because of that, I was held to much higher standards in the classroom. Sometimes that extended back home too. Before I knew it, I was sent to stand at the front, with my hands pulling on my ears for the rest of the morning. This wasn't my first time, and it wouldn't be my last. Mum stayed after school to teach art and then music to the more gifted students. She always told me, quite pointedly, that oxen are unable to appreciate the arts. Being grouped with the cud chewers, I never attended those lessons. I didn't want to spend a moment longer than I needed to in school anyhow. I raced the short distance back home. Dad was already there. We had some cornbread and goat's milk. I quickly washed up. As the midday sun passed its peak, we set off on our epic trek. We followed the previously forbidden eastern path. Even though it was becoming impractical, I was still allowed to sit on Dad's encumbered shoulders. That's how I will always remember him. He was so strong, and I always felt safe and protected. The houses shrunk into the distance as we ascended into the wilderness. I couldn't help but wonder why this path was forbidden. Sure, it was overgrown, but it was far from dangerous. The breeze blew bundles of free-flowing cotton seeds from the cottonwood trees, which added a dreaminess to the landscape as it drifted to the commands of the prevailing winds. One hefty piece brushed by my outstretched hand. It was so light I could hardly feel it. We stopped when we reached a steep, almost vertical slope. It looked like a wall had risen to defend against our intrusion. The path turned left, but Dad signalled to go straight up. It was the quicker route, apparently. He lifted me high, and I grabbed at the ledge. It was powdery and very slippery. He thrust my legs up, and I clambered over. After some effort and grunting, Dad followed. The twin whirls decorating his short black hair danced side by side melodically. As his head bobbed up, I noticed his dried-on milk moustache. I licked my top lip, tasting the same moustache. Trying to wipe it away with my sleeve was an option, but most of it was baked onto my skin. We patted down our dusty clothes. A ladder would have been helpful, but that was left unsaid. From this higher ground, I could see how the path wound around, and it was a fair distance to travel. A bit further on, I finally discovered the Devil's Tongue, and with immediacy I understood that it was perfectly named. The ledge looked exactly like a tongue flicking out, licking at the sky. I couldn't see a reason how such a natural phenomenon existed. Either side of the ledge, the precipice snaked away into the distance. I could sense the sheer vertical drop. Dad let me go on ahead. He knew I understood the dangers and trusted me to know my limits. I peered over the edge. 1,000 feet was a major exaggeration. It was maybe half that distance. My legs were steady. I have never been afraid of heights. When I was 7, I was invincible. Dad stood beside me and pointed to a cave in the valley below. It was much further than I had imagined. The cave didn't look much bigger than a cottontail hole from where I was standing. More importantly, there was no dragon. Dad said it could be out hunting. We waited patiently, and from tracking the position of the sun, I could tell that much time had gone to waste. I was beginning to think that this was an elaborate hoax to prank children of a certain age. When my hopes were fading with the light, there was a sudden and strange whooshing sound. This noise was new. It sounded like the sails of a windmill, flapping around in the wind. But that wasn't it. The deep, rhythmic thumping became louder with each beat. That was when I saw a mass of waving wings come into view. The creature flew gracefully over a hilltop, landing by the dry, grassless cave entrance. Dust was thrown up in every direction. My eyes widened, unblinking. I found no words. Not only was I speechless, but my jaw had dropped the whole 500 feet to the bottom of the precipice, or 1,000 if Pownall was to be believed. after the dust settled, I was mesmerised. The dragon was every bit as beguiling and majestic as I had dreamt. Her neck arched like an elegant swan. Her tail swished with the playfulness of a cat with a toy. Her wings were translucent in the ebullient light, a giant patchwork of sewn-together kites connected to a long, spindly skeletal structure. Nobody mentioned that she was the colour of sapphire. That was a pleasant surprise. With my mouth still agape, my first thoughts were murmured out aloud. Blue. Her name is Blue. Of course, nobody gifted me the right to name her, and I couldn't discern her gender either. But at the time, I thought this experience was mine, and mine alone. To a soon-to-be 8-year-old, simplicity is key. Blue is a name and a description. Also, in the Azurean language, all things of beauty are assigned as female. For example, flowers and rainbows are both feminine. By this measure, an exquisite and graceful blue dragon could only be female. Dad didn't disapprove. He pointed towards the sun. It was getting late. I pleaded for some more time. He gave me a few minutes. I watched on as flurries of diminutive clouds of cotton seeds glided past me and into the embrace of the four winds. This was perfection. The most beautiful scene that I could ever picture. As I left, I promised myself that I would study and learn everything about my new friend, Blue. I kept my promise, like I keep all my promises. I studied and I learnt a great deal. Her habits, her schedule, hunting techniques, food preferences. Mum only wished that I could be as attentive in her classroom. I recorded my findings in a series of journals that were sheets of parchment I bound together with a bone needle and thread, adorning each volume with plain kidskin covers. Sometimes Dad would come back with paper, but that was very infrequent, as it had to be bought in town, which was many miles away. Apart from writing, I also sketched drawings. I became an adept artist. Mum was wrong about me. I was at the Devil's Tongue so often that I made my own ladder and fastened it to the wall. I also made a small wooden plaque with the words, "The Hand of Gaia," and I petitioned for a name change. My reasoning was that the ledge looked more like a hand making an offering to the sky from the highest point of the plateau. Naturally, nobody listened to the ramblings of a child. Sitting with my legs dangling over the ledge, I spoke to Blue, and sometimes I read her stories from books. Other times I serenaded her with song. Of course, she never noticed. She never knew about our friendship. That was how I whiled away the days of my youth. Between visiting Blue, playing with my friends, getting into mischief, and being a part of a devoted family, the years drifted by like the clouds rolling over the North Mountains. For my 11th birthday, or a week after my birthday, to be more precise, Dad returned home and surprised me with a gift. He called it a telescope. He said it makes faraway things look much closer. All I had to do was put the narrow end to my eye. I was sceptical. I rubbed the end of the eyepiece with my thumb to check the ink. He shook his head and showed me how to use it. The trees were so big. The waterfall was right next to me. I thought to myself, this was truly an age of wonders. My first idea was to use this to spy on Blue. Dad followed me. Along the way, he saw the ladder I had made, complimenting me on the workmanship. He was always kind with his words. We both laid down by the ledge and took turns to see Blue at a truer size. I gasped in amazement when I saw the obscure details that were never visible before. The individual scales on her body, the dark hair like a horse's mane on her neck, and small horn-like protrusions on her head. Her teeth were sharp and close together. Spiked triangular ridges ran along the middle of her back and ended near the tip of her tail. The telescope's vision was slightly blurry, and adjusting it didn't really help the focus, but I didn't care. To me, it was the greatest invention and the best present I had ever received. I couldn't imagine how much money Dad must have spent on it. I suddenly felt so ashamed. But Dad said it was within our means and not to worry about it. When I got home, I instinctively tried to hide it from Mum. I could never guess at her reaction. When she found it, she laughed and explained that it was a present from them both. Mum was in an exceptionally good mood, which was quite unlike her. Later that evening, at dinner, she announced that we would be welcoming a new member of the family into our home next spring. I didn't quite understand, so Mum and Dad had to explain it more plainly. When it finally twigged, I had no choice but to congratulate them. I feigned happiness and joy, but in the back of my mind I was scared for my place in the family. Months later, when Mum was at her largest, and also at her greatest sensitivity to such comments, the time had finally arrived. I was sitting on an exposed part of the porch, being cooked by the midday sun, while Dad paced up and down outside, wearing down the grass. I was thinking I would much rather be spending time with Blue. When we heard a baby's cry, Dad raced inside. Old Madge, our local healer and resident midwife, scolded him. It didn't matter. Dad was so overjoyed that he danced amongst the clouds for the rest of the day. I was far more apprehensive. My life had changed, maybe for the worse. Everyone doted after little Cassius, my baby brother. Mum had to stay in bed for the longest time, though. Ma Wyndham, the local nanny, was busy looking after the Neelands' newborn boy, who was a couple of weeks older. With Mum unwell, there was no school, so Celise's older sister, Vix, moved in with us for a few weeks to look after Cassius. She was Mum's favourite pupil and a teacher in training. With her considerate and caring nature, she would make a superb wife for somebody in the future. I was glad to have her bright, burning eyes and winsome smile for company. Her sweet aroma of white jasmine stirred inside the house, and that awakened emotions inside of me that I couldn't quite comprehend. Mum was bedridden for a long time. I had never seen her so weak and dependent. I was told she had lost a lot of blood during labour. When I assisted Dad at work, there were times when I had to file down metal nails to a sharp point, and to me, the smell of iron filings clung to the air in her bedroom. I was upset that I had to work so much harder than before. I had to do all the chores, clean the floor, wash the clothes, cook dinner, wash up. The list was endless. I even had latrine duties. I was mad as hell, and it was difficult to conceal. It was selfish of me, I know, but I didn't even ask for a brother. Mum was beautiful and healthy before he came along, and I literally had no time to visit Blue at all. Everything was baby this, baby that. When Dad came home, the first thing he did was hold, kiss and pamper the baby. Nobody tucked me in at night. Nobody told me a bedtime story. I held my telescope close to my chest, and I cried myself to sleep. Mum, Dad, please come back to me. By the summer, everything had settled into a new pattern. Mum had recovered fully and was back at the schoolhouse. Vix moved out, which was a strangely deflating experience. Ma Wyndham stayed over instead in the mornings to sit with Cassius. I grew to love my baby brother with each passing day. After all, the same blood runs through our veins. He had my dimples too. My jealousy faded completely by the time my 12th birthday had come and gone. For once, it was a special occasion. With my baby brother around, Mum and Dad had an excuse to avoid the festival, and my birthday was celebrated within the family circle for the first time ever. That became my happiest birthday, edging out my 8th. In no time at all, Cassius was walking and then running about the house. As he progressed, it was an indicator that I was growing up quickly too. The summer solstice came and went again, along with my 13th birthday. 2 weeks after our most bounteous harvest for many years, the village celebration was cut short when everyone discussed the discovery of a large regiment of foreign soldiers passing through the road a few miles south of our village. Whilst on a supply run into town, they saw everything from their wagon at a distance. There were many wild theories and some anxious faces. Were they marching on our capital? There was no news about a war brewing, and we always maintained exceptional ties with our neighbours. After all, we were a part of the Alliance of the 9 Kingdoms. If war was a reality, officials would come to every village to conscript soldiers. I was amongst the concerned faces. Dad would be forced into the army. He had a kind soul and was incapable of harming anyone, let alone killing. The alternative terrified me even more. All day, I imagined Dad not returning home, killed on some bloody battlefield, his decaying body forsaken. The pervasive negativity followed me for the rest of the day. I tried to look on the bright side. The villagers didn't really know what was going on. These were the only facts at our disposal. The soldiers were from the neighbouring kingdom of Messos. They were around 200 to 300 in number. They had siege-type weapons. They bore the sigil of a red fox clutching a long sword and shield. Uninterested in battles or fighting, I watched on as the other children play-acted as soldiers, enacting battles with sticks and basket lids. The only times I ever fought were to protect my friends from village tyrants. Dad tried to keep busy, and I spent the rest of the day being his able assistant like we used to. Trying to expel the horrible images from my mind was difficult, so I prayed to the Sky Lords for good fortune on behalf of my family, and forgiveness for not keeping these bad omens at bay. Later, at dinner, I gazed longingly across the table. Mum, Dad, Cassius. We were truly blessed. I would do anything to keep it this way, our own private circle of love and happiness. That night, the bad omens followed me into my dreams. It was the aftermath of a vicious battle, and hundreds of bodies littered a field carpeted in scarlet, strangely visible despite the darkness. The eerie silence was broken by crows and wild dogs feasting on the spoils. I glided amongst them, invisibly, reaching a spot where I noticed familiarity. My bare feet squelched against the red grass. I bent down and examined more closely. I recognized the dead and lifeless eyes that were once warm and thoughtful. I sprang up in terror. Drenched in cold sweat, I sat on my bed. I must have screamed because after a few moments, Mum fumbled towards me in the dark with a firefly lantern in hand. "Shh! You're weak, Cassius. What's wrong?" Her words were barely louder than a whisper, but the volume carried far in the night air. Telling her about the nightmare, she placed the lantern on the wooden floor, then sat next to me. mopping away the dampness from my brow. Her hand moved down and brushed away my tears, and I didn't even realise I was crying. "Scooch over. I'll stay with you for a bit." She laid beside me and wriggled into a more comfortable position. "We haven't done this for a while, have we? You've grown so much. Sometimes I forget." She wrapped her arms around me. I had forgotten too. I had forgotten how it was always Mum who was by my side when I was scared, when I was sick. It was unfair of me to choose Dad over her every single time. I always looked up to him because of his optimism, kindness and compassion, but I didn't share any of his traits. Deep down, I knew I was more like Mum. Headstrong, forthright and stubborn, but also loyal, committed and unwavering. I examined her face in the gloom. Even in the dark of night, I could read her features. Smouldering, almond-shaped, hickory-brown eyes. Long, gently arching eyebrows. The outline of her straight brow. The almost heart-shaped face that was complicated by a prominent jawline. It was as though I was peering into a mirror. Only my nose belonged to Dad. Every other feature was Mum's. She told me the story of how she and Dad fell in love, and the intricately handcrafted gifts that he gave her during their drawn-out courtship. Afterwards, she smiled her warm and sincere smile, stroking my dark hair with her hand. "What am I going to do with you?" She was so close to me. Our exhaled breaths kissed each other softly. And with that, I fell into a deep, dreamless slumber. When I woke up the next morning, she was gone, leaving behind a few stray hairs and her own sweet scent of lavender. After breakfast, I walked with Mum to the schoolhouse. During lessons, she noticed my moping, disinterested posture. Usually, I'd be sent to the front and hung out to dry, but she didn't punish me today. She had the look of concern. I flashed a secret smile at her, and my dimples twinkled. Reassured, she was on point for the rest of the morning. Mum stayed behind to teach the gifted artists and musicians. I went home. Cassius was having his midday nap, and I wasn't keen on keeping Ma Wyndham company. Watching the grass grow would be preferable, so I decided to pay Blue a visit instead. I grabbed my satchel, checking the contents. Telescope, charcoals. I was especially proud of a brand new item in my bag. It was my 13th birthday present from Mum and Dad. A professionally made, leather-bound journal, complete with a strap and buckle. I hadn't even opened it yet, afraid that doing so would make it imperfect. I decided today would be the day, but I would have to hurry. Having become an expert in Blue's behavioural patterns, I knew she'd be back from her morning hunt right about now, so I ran all the way there. As I climbed the ladder, I heard strange new sounds. It was a cacophony of human voices. I peered over my ledge. What in Gaia is going on? To my sickening surprise, I saw the soldiers everyone talked about encamped in the valley below. They must have taken the long way around and arrived shortly before midday. Giant crossbows and catapults on wheels were set up, pointed towards the cave entrance. To the sides were riders carrying lances and spears on horseback. To the rear, hundreds of soldiers stood in loose formation, holding longbows. At the very front, there were more horses, on the left and right flanks of the main bulk of the regiment. They had something strapped to their saddles. I quickly took out my telescope. Ropes were tied to the modified saddles of the horses on the left. I traced the course of the ropes, and they extended all the way to the horses on the right side. In the middle, from what I could discern, was a giant net. Skylords. They weren't here to start a war. They were here to kill a dragon. My heart skipped several beats. This can't be happening. I have to do something. I frantically waved my arms and yelled to the soldiers below. Stop! Please stop! Please don't do this! She hasn't harmed anyone! She isn't dangerous! Many heads turned up towards me, but they couldn't hear my words. A few of the soldiers waved back. I'm not here to cheer you on, you idiots! Get out of here! You're not welcome! It was no use. I realised there and then I had no power to stop them. No power at all. I sank to my knees and prayed. Please don't come back now, Blue. Hide until it's safe. No sooner had I said that, I heard the unmistakable beating of wings, a sound that was as familiar and close to me as my racing heartbeat. Blue discharged a monstrous shriek before she landed. I jumped out of my skin as the ghastly howl pierced my eardrums. That was completely new to me. Many of the horses leapt and stampeded in a frenzy. Her warning was not heeded. I watched in horror as the horses at the front galloped towards Blue. They raced past on either side of her gigantic frame, and the rope net slammed into her. It was a complete failure. I could only imagine they were expecting to ensnare or subdue her, preventing her from taking to the air. As the slack became taut, the horses were stopped in their tracks and lashed violently to the ground. The momentum and savagery of the crash flung the riders through the air before smashing into the hard earth. Blue was deranged with anger, and she huffed menacingly before a sparkling blue flame was unleashed. Up until this point, I had never seen a blue flame before. When she hunted, her prey was only ever met with a red flame. I watched countless times as gazelles, goats, and horses caught on fire, their spindly hind legs shrivelling and contorting before they crashed into oblivion. This was different. This was terrifying. Her blue blast cut through horses and men alike. My trembling hand covered my mouth as I whimpered in fear. The grounded horses melted in front of my eyes. Others exploded into fragments on contact. Armour frazzled and liquefied. Terrified screams and cries filled the air. Please stop this, Blue. Fly away. Leave here forever. No more killing. Stop. Please stop. She's only defending her territory. It's her home. I could have cried until I died from heartbreak, but nobody could hear me. Nobody wanted to listen. My tears stung my eyes as I watched on helplessly. The noise from the giant crossbows was sudden and loud. Blue kept her stance low on all fours. The massive arrows struck her body, but instead of piercing her hide, the arrows shattered into pieces on impact. The soldiers reacted by quickly wheeling the catapults into position. The wooden arms snapped forwards with tremendous force and fired a volley of large rocks. They hit their target, but the rocks bounced off Blue's impenetrable skin like pebbles against a mountain. This infuriated her further. The catapults burst into flame. Men and animals alike ran for their lives as the blue flame carved through their ranks mercilessly. The soldiers had failed. Their weapons and tactics could not murder Blue. They did not take into account her imperious size and ferocity. Please stop. No more. Blue was emboldened, standing on her hind legs, her chest puffed out in defiance. That was when a second volley of giant arrows sped towards her. 2 of the arrows made their mark. One pierced Blue under her wing joint, and another punctured her hide on her softer underbelly. She reeled in pain. I cried with her. I couldn't watch this insanity anymore. She was fighting for her life now. Was she getting tired? Her flame was not as blue, introducing tinges of red and orange. The men didn't notice the difference. The pure malevolence was incinerating them all the same. My mind was numb. I had seen too much. She wasn't going to stop until every one of these trespassers became cinders. I was taken by complete surprise, as though she heard my thoughts. Her legs coiled, and she flapped her wings, launching herself upwards into the air. Her left wing swung unnaturally. The arrow must have hurt her badly. She was struggling for elevation. My fear suddenly turned to elation when she was finally able to take flight. My friend. She can escape. I'll never see her again, but she will be safe. My demeanour changed sharply when my eyes followed her line of flight. She was heading straight towards me, and it looked like she hadn't gained enough height to clear the ledge. Before my mind could comprehend the situation, a gigantic hulking mass blotted out the sunlight from above. I instinctively stayed low to the ground. The force of the wind currents was incredible. The power generated from Blue's wing threw me several feet backwards. I was lucky she didn't flap a moment later, because I would have been blown forwards off the ledge. The dust stung my eyes even more than my salty tears. I couldn't see anything through this haze. I rubbed my eyes furiously while I found my bearings. I had to find Blue. No. Her stilted flight path placed her almost directly over my village. My mind was racing with anxiety and alarm. I didn't care about those soldiers, but my village, my home, everyone dear to me. Don't look down, Blue. Look straight ahead and fly into the horizon. I was mortified when I observed her head tilt towards the buildings, where the emanation of new screams and shouts caught her attention. Blue had never flown so close before. She raised a fiery shriek and dived downwards. No! Mum! Dad! I raced back down the eastern path with everything I had, leaping off the wall. In my panic, the landing was heavy and my knees nearly buckled. I forgot my satchel. I have to leave it behind. My mind is awry with agonizing unease, torn in too many directions. I've lost track of Blue. The trees are blocking the view of my home. I'm one of the fastest runners in the village. I can make it in 2 minutes. Please be all right. Please be safe. If only I could close my ears to the screams of disbelief as they intensify into screams of abject terror. I stumble and fall, grazing my knee. I continue on. I have to get home. Mum, Dad, and Cassius will be waiting for me. We can escape together, as a family. We can make it if we are together. I feel like I've been running for hours, but I finally make it to the eastern gate. I stop, frozen in time. My mind hasn't prepared me to face the consequences of Blue's wrath. The outlying houses and buildings are all pristine. That isn't where I'm looking. Have I died and gone to hell? The centre of Dayne village has been swallowed by hellfire. Buildings to the south are aflame. South? My house! I race back home, my breathing ragged and straggly. The air is heavy with smoke and ash, cloying and clogging. I'm swimming against the current, everyone fleeing in the opposite direction. Nobody has time to answer my questions. I'll do this all myself. I'll make it. I'm home. No. My house is aflame. A lifetime of precious memories gone in an instant. Screams from the depth of my soul erupt, competing with the fiery plumes for breath. My shouts of desperation fill the acrid air. Mum? Mum, where are you? I shouldn't have asked. I shouldn't have asked. Please, Skylords, help me. My mind will never be purged of this horror. A tall, slender figure appears from under the flaming door arch. The same door arch I walked under thousands of times before. It clutched a parcel close to its chest, holding onto it for dear life. The figure staggers forward, each step filled with hopeless agony, its hand reaching out towards me. No, I don't know you. I don't know you. My body becomes flaccid as the blood drains away. Deep down, I know. The abnormal moving effigy is ablaze. The parcel screams like a baby. The figure finally succumbs to the reality that it can no longer survive. It drops to the scorched earth, motionless. If I don't give it a name, if I don't identify her, then this isn't real. Mum? Please, no. My world has fractured into shards that can never be rebuilt. My blood returns when I hear another hellish shriek. I follow the sound with an empty mind. Dad, I can still find him. Everything will be all right. He can fix anything. I run towards the animal palace. No. It used to be here. Blue must have landed with a crash. It was meant to stand for 100 years, but the animal palace is decimated. Animals scatter in every direction, confused and terrified. That's when I remember. No. Dad said he was spending the entire day fixing something under that roof. It isn't even there anymore, splintered into 1,000 pieces. My memory must be playing tricks on me. I'm sure he said he was doing something else. Tending the fields, inspecting the water wheels, something else, anything else. Dad is not under all that ruin. And that wasn't Mum or my baby brother. That wasn't even my house. No, that was a neighbour's house. It has to be. I've got this all wrong. My bearings are all wrong. Ma Neeland has a baby too, and their house looks exactly the same as mine. Anything will do. Any lie will do. Anyway, Mum is always in the schoolhouse. I look over for confirmation, but the schoolhouse is burning to the ground. Heartbroken mothers kneeling outside, clawing and wailing against an invisible wall. No. Vix is always there cleaning up for the next day. Vix. Where is Solis? I can't process this information quickly enough as my head spins into a daze. The beautiful place that I once called my home has become a raging inferno. I can't recognize anything. Everyone is running for their lives. I drop to my knees. I can't stop crying. The truth is inescapable. Vix is always in the schoolhouse at this time of day. And that is my house. That was Mum. And she was carrying my brother. And Dad, the one I love the most, he is always where he says he will be. I have lost everything. Through my tears, through the emptiness, only hate remains. It is the only tether that binds me to my new existence. No, I don't want it. I don't want hate to be imprinted on my heart. Blue? Please, kill me too. Kill me too! With my vision blurred, I tried to focus on Blue and her murderous rage. I decide to stand up, bounding towards her with sheer willpower. It will be the last thing I ever do. I hold up my hands, pointing accusingly, screaming with everything I have, all my rage, all my fury. Why? Why did you do this? I choke back my tears. You meant so much to me. I loved you. My voice breaks along with my heart. I curse you. I curse you and all those soldiers. Kill me, or I will kill all of you. I swear it. Look at me. The dragon arches and cranes her neck in my direction. Through all the panicked shrieks, she hears me. She sees me. Somehow, she sees me for the first time. After all the years I have gazed upon her in secret, we finally meet. My legs stop working. In my moment of finality, do I really want to die? It is no longer my choice. Her shrill, clicking screech competes and wins our argument. I can only watch as she breathes in before exhaling a tremendous blast of fiery red flame in my direction. My instinct is to dodge, but is it too late? I scream wildly as a spectacular plume of fire blows past me with the force of a turbulent wave, ripping me away from the ground like a tree pulverized by a hurricane. The fire ripples through my being, wanting desperately to violate my flesh. My breaths are fitful, struggling to acclimatize to the sudden surge of heat. I feel my body being propelled through the air, completely outside of my control. My sight is transfixed on the flames dancing around in front of my eyes, wrapping around my limbs like poisonous vines, stabbing their teeth to suckle on sap. Am I burning? There is agony. There is terror. But soon, I feel nothing. I am without pain, without weight. If this is my dying thought, it is a comfortable one. I can follow my family to Elysia, where we can spend eternity together. That was when my first life ended, and my world changed forever.